be a little bit slow. YouTube's a little slow. Looks like we're live on Facebook. We're live on Periscope. We're live on R&R Law. And now we're live on YouTube as well. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney in Scottsdale, Arizona. Watching the Watchers is a show that we do to monitor police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, judicial misconduct, any misconduct taking place in our criminal justice system. We want to know about it. We want to cover it. We want to shine some light on it and increase the levels of transparency that we see so that we actually get more justice. It's something that we strive for here at our law firm, and unfortunately we just don't see a lot of it. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of misjustice, injustice. We're talking about a young man who's taken from this planet a little too soon, much too soon actually. His name is Ahmaud Arbery. He was aged 25 years old when he was shot and killed on February 23rd, 2020. Now, this is a case that has really kind of baffled me. I heard of this story about right around the time it happened, and I thought it was very strange that the two people who shot this young man were not arrested. And I didn't pay much attention to it, quite frankly. The story sort of matured and developed through February, March, and April, and then it got into May. And as we know, the rest of the world has sort of been melting down. We've seen the coronavirus and everything happen. And so it's been a little difficult to sort of follow this with the rigor that I would have preferred. I will tell you that I was reading an article somewhat recently before the video leaked that detailed, buried down in the article, and it says that we have a comment here that somebody's got a detailed report of the case. Hey, the neo-Epicurean. So I'll get through my slides and then we'll discuss that. But what we're talking about is a situation where, you know, this guy was shot and killed. The two people who did it were not arrested, and for many months, and I had no idea why. Then I was reading an article, and buried in the article was a line that said, "Oh, by the way, the guy who did it used to be a former police officer." And I thought to myself, well, there it is. That makes sense. Now I understand why this was sort of put on hiatus for 2.5 months, because the prosecutor's office was protecting their own. Now, this was all speculation. Obviously, I didn't know much about it until I started diving into it. So I've been reading everything, watching people's interpretations, listening to a lot of people talk about the law in a way that they think that they're being coherent and cognizant of how it all works, but in reality, it's just kind of not happening that way. What I've seen, I've kind of detailed it. I've seen people break up into two camps, really, and so it doesn't really matter where you fall. I don't fall in either one of these camps. I'm going to tell you which camp I fall into. But by and large, when we're having this discussion, it helps us to understand sort of what the framework is that we're working under. Who is believing what? That may influence what they're saying and why they're saying it. And so these are the two camps that I've kind of identified. And here's what we've got. On the one side, we've got the traditional left. These are people who think that everything that they're seeing is related to racism. It's related to to white supremacy. They're calling the people who did it murderers, like they were intentionally out there to go and kill Ahmaud, and they're saying that they're guilty. They're guilty of murder. You know, these are people who actually voluntarily, intentionally wanted to go out there, set out with the intention of killing him. On the other side, we've got the reverse. We've got the traditional right. So these are the people who say, well, everything here was legitimate. Everything here was related to self-defense, and really they're innocent, that they had every right to go up and have a conversation with him. They had a right under the Georgia statute to make a citizen's arrest, and they went and did it. He ended up attacking them, and so now they're justified. They're allowed to go have that conversation, and because he sort of attacked them according to their version of the events, that justifies the fact that the gun was fired, that he shot him, and that they killed him. Now, I don't subscribe to either one of those things. I've long said on this show that I've never understood the dichotomy, the difference between these two sides. On the traditional left, so the left, the liberal type of political faction ideology, they're saying, normally their sort of position is, big government is good. We want more authority. We want more control. We want more help, more social services. But as soon as it comes to the police, suddenly there's a distrust of the police. So big government is good, but the police are bad. On the conservative, on the Republican side, on the traditional right side, it's the reverse of that. It is, Well, we don't like the government at all. We want less government. We want less taxes, smaller government, more individual freedoms, unless it comes to the police. Of course, the police, they can do no wrong. Prosecutors can do no wrong. Everybody who is working for the government in that capacity is perfectly fine, and they can just kind of skate away without any repercussion. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He's got bad, government good, police bad, small government good, bad, good, and police good. It doesn't make any sense. So why are these two people sort of aligning, these two camps aligning in the way that they're aligning? I don't know. I just think it comes back down to politics, and gun rights advocates are on one side, and sort of the people who are looking for, more equality in terms of race relations, they're on the other side. And so these two camps are developing, and a lot of the people that I follow, a lot of the people that I get a lot of information from, are sort of aligning themselves into these camps. And a lot of them are doing so incorrectly, improperly. I just don't think there's a lot of reasoning behind it, but they're aligning themselves with the camp because that's where they're supposed to be. That's where their audience is. That's where their demographics lie. And so they're just separating themselves into those different camps. What I would like to do is propose that there is a third camp that I absolutely subscribe to, and it is unequivocally the badpopo camp. Very bad popo across the board. And when I talk about bad popo, I don't just mean the police. I mean the prosecutors who were involved. There's 3 prosecutors that we're going to talk about today on the show, and all of them, I think, have some level of culpability, big, actually massive problems that were taking place as this whole situation had unfolded. Same with law enforcement. I'm going to show you some bickering that was taking place back and forth between the prosecutors and the police. There's just, this case is one of the most egregious but most sort of publicly available cases of prosecutorial misconduct that I've ever seen. Just so clear, cut and dry, right on the face of it. It's obvious that there was a whitewash going on, that there was a cover-up going on. It was not until the public caught wind of this thing that we started to see some action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the timeline first, right? We're going to do a deep dive into this thing. I'm going to take you through the timeline. Then what I want to do is break up each one of those different sub points in that timeline and explain sort of what was happening around that. And then we'll leave you with some conclusions, and we'll ask, what do we want to do in terms of our public policy? Do we want to create these types of incentives? So hopefully we can leave this with a takeaway there. All right, so let's talk about the timeline in the case. Okay, so I broke it down. You'll see here on this slide that I broke it down just by the main sort of, there's a lot more that was taking place in between each one of these sub points, but we have a shooting that takes place on February 23rd. Okay. Immediately thereafter, the very first prosecutor, Jackie Johnson, comes through and basically we're going to talk about her involvement, but this is prosecutor number 1. Prosecutor number 2 from a different county comes into play very shortly thereafter on February 24th, right around there, and these two come to a conclusion. So Jackie Johnson says she's prosecutor number 1. I can't prosecute this case. Barnhill comes over from a different prosecutor's office, and he comes to the conclusion this was justifiable homicide. Okay, we've got a big period of time here in between February 24th and April 3rd, where presumably what they're doing is an autopsy and they're doing their investigation. The same prosecutor, so prosecutor number 2, then sends a letter over to the chief of police. The chief of police then, basically in this letter, I'm going to show you some parts of the letter, basically is saying that there's no probable cause for additional charges. He recuses himself, goes over to prosecutor number 3. Third prosecutor is now on the case. Nothing happens again. Nothing is happening here until the video leaks, and then we see immediate action. We see this go right over to the grand jury. They get indicted, presumably on May 6th, and then the arrest takes place on May 7th. The big question that many people have is what the heck was going on in all of this time? So the police had the video this entire time, presumably. It may have taken them a day or two to get it and process it and realize what they've had, but they had that video this entire time, okay, the entire time. So my sort of initial thought process was that they had the video. I thought that they didn't have the video. I thought that the video got leaked, and that's what spurred the sort of the rush to take action, to take this into the grand jury and to move on and move forward with it. They didn't. They actually had the video the entire time. They just didn't release it. So once the public saw it, then we see some massive action. And it goes back, and then in these 2 days, we get all sorts of activity. It goes over to the grand jury. The grand jury reviews it. They say there's enough probable cause here, and they make the arrest. Okay, so that's the timeline. Now we're gonna break that down a little bit just so we can segment it and do a deep dive analysis into this thing. But first, let's take a quick look at some of the facts. You're going to know a lot of this, so I'm going to fly through it relatively quickly. This case happened in Brunswick, Georgia. Brunswick, Georgia is located here. It's part of Glenn County, and Glenn County is one of 5 counties that make up the Brunswick Judicial Circuit. The Brunswick Judicial Circuit. So it's important to know that, because what we're going to see here is one prosecutor hand it off to another prosecutor, and then that second prosecutor is going to hand it over to a third prosecutor, and everybody's kind of kicking the ball around because of the close proximity of the prosecutors to Gregory McMichael, who was the one who's the father in this case, who ultimately led to Ahmaud's death. So it's happening in Brunswick Judicial Circuit. These are the 2 gentlemen. Of course, we've seen them ad nauseum. Gregory McMichael and Travis McMichael. These are the 2 people responsible for killing Ahmaud Arbery. And here some interesting things I didn't know about this one particular guy, Gregory McMichael. Age 64, he worked for the Glenn County Police Department from 1982 to 1989. And it's important to note that from 2006 to 2014, and from 2018 until his retirement, he was not even a cop anymore. So he was just an investigator. He's not allowed to arrest anybody. He's not allowed to put people in handcuffs or do any of that stuff. I see a lot of sort of critics who are sympathizing with Gregory, saying that, well, he's a cop and he's trained and he's highly skilled and he knows how to identify suspects. And this is something that he's been doing for 30 years. And so we should defer to his judgment on this thing. Well, I'd like to point out that that's not really the case. He was an investigator. He was with the police department, but for 2006 to 2014, so a long period of time there. And then again, very recently from 2018 until he retired, he was just an investigator. So he had no authority. Now, he did work for the Glenn County PD, which is a part of Brunswick. So the Brunswick County Attorney's Office, they call them district attorneys there, in that judicial circuit, presumably worked with this guy a lot. So he was there for a long period of time, 82 to 89, 7 years there, and then 8 years over 2006 to 2014, 16 years, and then again after he was retired. So, probably right around 20 years, he had been working with these people. So he's very, very close with them. We go back to his son, Travis McMichael. Travis McMichael was the actual shooter. So he was the person who we see in the video who had the shotgun and who shot him 3 times. There's debate over whether he actually shot him or not, if you can believe that. We're going to talk about that here shortly. But those are the 2 people. Now let's do a quick recap of the events that happened on the day of February 23rd. Arbery was running, right? He was running. One side says he was jogging. The other side says he was fleeing. Gregory, the father, thought he was a burglary suspect. So Gregory yells to his son, hey, that guy's over there. Greg and his son get in the vehicle. They pursue him. They claim that they pulled up side next to him and just said, hey, we want to talk to you. The altercation occurs. We see about 20 seconds of a video that doesn't really give us much detail other than we see him actually get shot and he's killed. There's debate over whether he run and attacked him and who attacked whom and who was doing what, but we don't really get a lot of that from the video. We do get some of it from the police report, which I want to show you here very shortly. Okay, so on February 23rd, we have the incident. Ahmaud is shot and killed, and that same day, we get notice that Jackie Johnson, who is this woman here, was the first prosecutor who was assigned. So she's from the Brunswick District Attorney's Office, and she gets assigned to the case. Now, she used to work with Gregory McMichael, who was the former officer. So Jackie Johnson and Gregory McMichael are fairly close. Presumably they've worked on cases, or they worked on cases very frequently with her other sort of deputy attorneys. So if she's the chief circuit court prosecutor for that district, then she is, she's presumably has other people who work under her, and they're going to be responsible for handling a lot of the cases. She sets policy and does those sorts of things. Their system is a little bit different than it is in Arizona. I'm not innately familiar with how they have all their jurisdictions structured and things. It sounds somewhat similar to Arizona, but just a little bit different. So if I'm using the wrong terminology, that's why. But Jackie Johnson she's a lead prosecutor. She gets notice that this incident happened, finds out that one of the people who's involved in it used to work at her office. She apparently recuses herself. Now, it's important to note that she recused herself because of the fact that she was working with Gregory Michael. Also made an interesting note that Jackie Johnson is currently running unopposed for the Republican nomination for the upcoming election. I think I read an article saying that she's actually being challenged by an independent now, but as it stands, as of today, she's basically running unopposed for that nomination. So she's right in the middle of an election. Now, she has come out and said, yep, I immediately recused myself, no malfeasance at all. As soon as I knew he worked for my office, I went ahead and recused myself, which is really the right thing to do. Unfortunately, doesn't seem like that happened. So we have some information from two different commissioners who are essentially judges. So Arizona has commissioners and we've got judges. It's just kind of a different designation for a judge. They've got a little bit less authority, a little bit less power, but they handle a lot of legal matters, and they're involved in the courts, and they sit on a bench and they decide cases. So I'm not sure if that's exactly how it works in Georgia, but that's how it works in Arizona. So what we see here is that we've got two commissioners who say, yeah, actually, Jackie Johnson told the police not to make any arrests. So not to arrest the McMichaels, which the police apparently wanted to do. So the police are there. They see what happened. It's pretty clear as day that we had three guys chase down another guy, and he's now dead. So maybe there's some criminality in there. I mean, you don't need to dive into the facts much more than that. Maybe there's some there. And the fact that we have a shooter who shot three times and killed a guy is a problem. So the police are thinking, well, what charges can we pursue here? False imprisonment, aggravated assault, murder, manslaughter. What's going on? They're running their minds through the different possibilities. And apparently Jackie Johnson comes out and says, don't make the arrests. These two commissioners are the ones who confirm it. We've got Commissioner Peter Murphy. This article comes from the Atlantic Journal-Constitution, who says the police at the scene went to her saying they were ready to arrest both of them. They were the police at the scene who had done the investigation. This commissioner has spoken with Glenn County Police, says they told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution she shut them down to protect her friend McMichael. Okay, so that's a commissioner. That's somebody in a judicial role. Commissioner Peter Murphy says the same thing. Commissioner Peter Murphy also spoke directly to the Glenn County Police about the incident, said officers at the scene concluded they had probable cause to make arrest, and they contacted Johnson's office to inform the prosecutor of the decision. They were told not to make the arrest. So we've got two judges, two commissioners, two people who are mostly independent are getting word from the police officers on the scene that Jackie Johnson told them don't make any arrests. So this is presumably without reviewing much evidence, presumably without seeing the video footage at that time because they were at the scene and they wanted to make the arrest. And so we're making some presumptions here, but it's also important, that these two guys are basically independent as far as I can tell. The police department is also saying, they released a statement as well saying that no, that's true, actually. Jackie Johnson told us not to go make those arrests. So these stories start leaking out. As I mentioned, Jackie Johnson is in the middle of an election, and so she fires back. Now, her statement, she comes back with a statement which is pretty aggressive, and here's what we've got. Here's what she says. Commissioners Murphy and Booker have chosen to make baseless and false accusations in an attempt to excuse and ignore the problems of the Glenn County PD. They are ultimately responsible. Chief said it was a mistake. They should have called Georgia Bureau of Investigation to investigate the case immediately. Here's where it gets pretty interesting. As evidenced by the events, GBI was able to investigate, make a probable cause determination, and make arrests within 2 days of receiving the case. She's right about that. This is what law enforcement agency does. And if the Glenn County Police Department is unable to make a probable cause determination on its own, why do we have a police department? Wow. So that is a prosecutor who's basically pointing the finger right back at the police and saying they screwed it up. The police then come back and release a statement. They have a very long statement. I didn't clip it and include it here because it is so long, but they break down a minute by minute. I got a lot of the dates and times from their analysis, and they're saying, look, we were there, we were on the scene, we wanted to make these arrests, but we talked to your office and you guys specifically told us don't do it. They corroborate a lot of the timeline that we're going to continue to go through that we've gotten actually from independent sources and from letters itself. So the police department matches their sort of timeline of the event matches a lot of what I'm seeing from the independent news sources. Jackie Johnson's just simply doesn't. So it seems to me if there's going to be people to believe, who do you want to believe? It's ultimately up to your credibility. Jackie comes out and lays out a pretty strong repudiation of the claims from those two commissioners. But we've got two commissioners, we've got multiple police officers who are all saying we wanted to make the arrest, but the prosecutors just didn't allow it to happen. All right, so we go back to the timeline. Remember that Jackie actually recuses herself at some point. I don't have the exact date or if there was any formal confirmation of that, but they bring in a different prosecutor. So when a prosecutor who's in her position, when they have to conflict off an entire office, basically, because the guy who shot Ahmaud was actually an investigator for that department, they had to just basically delete the entire department. You guys cannot be involved in the case anymore. So they brought in a prosecutor from a neighboring circuit district, and his name was George Barnhill. Okay, so George Barnhill is the second prosecutor, and he comes across from the Waycross Judicial Circuit. He writes a 5-point letter on April 3rd. He sends it over to the Glenn County police captain, insufficient probable cause. He says that, goes through and details it all. I'm going to show you some bullet points from his letter, but he says insufficient probable cause, don't make any arrests, no warrants, justifiable homicide. He sticks through his sort of statement that he gave at the outset. He is, right around the same time in the same letter, he mentions that he was asked to recuse himself also because his son, who is a lawyer, works over in Brunswick. So works back over with Jackie in her office. And he says in his letter, there's no bias, there's no malfeasance, it doesn't matter one way or the other, but I'm going to go ahead and recuse myself anyways. So what does his letter say? So he writes this 5-point letter. It's one of the most bizarre things I've seen from a prosecutor. I mean, even just in terms of, composition and grammar and all sorts of things. I was kind of surprised that this little thought kind of went into it. But it's a long letter, several pages. Let me just break it down into bullet points for you. So number one, he says in his 5 bullet point synopsis, his memo, he says, I've been doing this for a long time. And he goes through all of his credentials. About 36 years, I've been doing this and this. I've done 100 murder trials. I've done this stuff all up and down the street. And therefore, my opinion is valid and you should listen to me. And that's it, right? So he's laying his background. Point number 2, he says the autopsy confirms the prior decision that there was no probable cause to make the arrest. He talks a little bit about where the bullet entered Ahmaud's hand, and it's kind of a short paragraph. He just says, all right, that's it. Third paragraph, he says, we have, and he uses this quote, and I want to pull it out for you quickly here. He says, solid firsthand probable cause. So we have solid firsthand probable cause justifying the citizen's arrest. Then he says that Greg and Travis, which were the father and son who ended up shooting him, in point 4, were allowed to have firearms. So we didn't see any criminality there. They weren't doing anything wrong because they're allowed to have firearms. He didn't go into any analysis about false imprisonment or kidnapping or any of those types of crimes. He just jumps right into it. He says we had in point 3, solid firsthand probable cause. In point 4, they were allowed to have firearms. There's no criminality. And then he's in what's almost unbelievable that he says this. He says, basically, we don't even know who shot the gun. We know that it was in Travis's hand, but Ahmaud initiated the fight, and therefore, because there was a struggle going on over the shotgun, because he was pulling it and pushing it, that basically we can't tie the cause of the gun being fired back over to Travis. So what he's saying is that Ahmaud probably shot himself multiple times. The gun went off 3 times, so he must have been the one who was pulling the trigger on each one of those things. So a dead guy shot himself 3 times, not just once, 3 times, because this prosecutor is twisting himself up into a pretzel to try to justify his conclusion. Now, here's an actual excerpt from the letter. So this is where he says, it appears Travis McMichael, Greg McMichael, and Brian William, who is otherwise known as Roddy, were following in hot pursuit a burglary suspect with solid first-hand probable cause in their neighborhood and telling him to stop. So I still don't know what that solid first-hand probable cause is. We've seen that there were some other videos. I've seen people posting these other videos of somebody who is either Ahmaud or somebody who looks like Ahmaud, actually going through different empty buildings and construction sites and things like that. I didn't, that theoretically could be a trespass. Maybe he took something. That person took something at the time. I have no idea. It really doesn't have anything to do with this particular incident, okay? Because we're going to get to the citizen's arrest statute here very quickly, but it's not particularly relevant, okay? What he did, if he was walking through an old house, if he was, in other places where he shouldn't have been, whether or not that is actually Ahmaud is up for anybody's guess, but it really has nothing to do with the citizen's arrest statute. I'm going to show you why here very shortly. But again, solid first-hand probable cause. I just don't know what that means. I don't know what they saw, and I'm going to show you why. We have actual excerpts from the police report, so we know what Travis and his father were saying, Greg were saying back over to the police right when this stuff happened, and it just doesn't match up with sort of an immediate need of an arrest. So that was bullet point 3. Then we go over to bullet point 5. Now this was the one that I just really didn't understand. He says it's very long, kind of a big long, run-on sentence. Just a bizarre type of statement. I mean, he's really, really twisting himself to manipulate the facts. He goes through the actual blood shots. He goes the angles. And he says, just as importantly, while we know McMichael had his finger on the trigger, we do not know who caused the firing. So Arbery would only had to pull the shotgun 1/16, 1/8 of an inch to fire the weapon himself. And in the height of the altercation, this is entirely possible. Oh, by the way, he's got mental health problems and prior convictions, which he does. He's got, I think, a prior shoplifting charge, and he's got a prior charge for bringing a gun to school. He was on probation for that for a certain period of time. Again, neither Travis nor Greg would have known any of that, so it shouldn't go into that analysis. If they learned it after the fact, that's all well and good, but the citizen's arrest statute doesn't say you get to make an arrest, do something, and then go and investigate the case. That's not part of the statute. Okay, so not a real coherent argument that I can see there. Basically just trying to come up with a bunch of facts, third shot, second shot, first and second shots, he's going through it. But again, what was the basis for Travis and Greg going after him at all? What was the basis for that? They saw him running. They saw him fleeing. They thought he was a suspect. Does that give them enough? We're going to dive into it. We're going to get to the statute here shortly. All right. Then what happens next? So we go back to the timeline, and we know from about February 20th to May 5th, so about 70-something days in there, nothing is happening. It goes from the first prosecutor to the second prosecutor. It goes ultimately to a third prosecutor because Barnhill actually recuses himself. So his son worked over at the Brunswick department. He recuses himself because Ahmaud's family is concerned about it. And now he's off the case. So it goes over to a third prosecutor who also sits on the case. So we've gone through 3 prosecutors at this point, about 70-something days of inaction. Nobody's doing anything on it. And then on May 5th, the video leaks. So this is a video that I've already explained they had this entire time. Somebody else leaked it to the press. So this guy, Alan Tucker, is a criminal defense lawyer. He leaks the video. Apparently it came from this fellow named William Bryan, who is going to be in the police report, and his name is Roddy. And there is the video. It comes out, and boom, within about 2 days, we get some activity on the case. So the third prosecutor then takes the case and says, you know what? I've seen it. I don't even know that I can personally make a decision on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it over to a grand jury. So on May 5th, the video gets released. I believe on May 6th, it may have been the same day. May 6th, the grand jury hears the facts of the case. He's indicted immediately. Both of these people are indicted on murder charges. They're arrested on May 7th. So in 2 days, this whole thing starts to see momentum, but it took the public getting the video. 3 different prosecutors and basically from 3 different agencies have all just kept that stuff under wraps. So this video gets leaked. And we have the video. I'm actually not going to play it. You probably have seen it. We're just not going to play it. We've seen enough of it, and it doesn't really add a whole lot of analysis to anything additional to the analysis, quite frankly. We've seen it. We've heard about it a lot. Now, the police are obviously very unhappy that the video was released, because now they've got to go back and explain the prior malfeasance. Why didn't they release the video, or why didn't they prosecute this individual? You can draw your own conclusions on that one, but I think they were, of course, covering for somebody that they knew and they liked, and they wanted this story to go a certain way. So they were unhappy about the video being released, and the actual Georgia Bureau of Investigation says that on the morning of May 5th, the day that the video was released, GCPD requested that the GBI investigate the public release of the video related to Arbery's death. So the police department now wants an investigation into the video. They're unhappy that this got leaked, and now they have to go through and fix all of the mistakes that they've made, but they really want to dive into this thing. So that's what we're talking about here. The video is released. Shortly thereafter, we see an arrest take place. We've got a May 7th arrest from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Actually makes the arrest. McMichael is arrested. He's charged with aggravated assault and murder, and his bond is denied. A question that I've seen come up is, well, why was he charged with murder if he didn't actually pull the trigger? So Travis was the one who actually pulled the trigger 3 times, and his father, Greg, was not. He was in the back of the truck, from what I could tell, kind of fumbling around with the gun. He may have been in the truck. I'm not sure exactly where he was, but he didn't actually pull the trigger. So why is he involved in that? Well, it comes down to what's called felony murder. And so there's a concept in criminal law that if you are involved in the crime, let's say you're driving somebody to the bank, and the person goes into the bank and robs the bank, and in that robbing, in that incident, the person who's robbing the bank shoots and kills somebody while you are the driver, because you were involved in that entire kind of scheme, in that conspiracy, in that entire process. You were involved in a felony, which is bank robbery, and because a person died as a result of your involvement in that, they're gonna tie that person's murdering the bank teller back onto you. It's called felony murder, which is exactly what happened here, right? If Travis is said to have not been in accord with the citizen's arrest statute, and he actually conducted he basically called his son, and they all dragged everybody out there, and they chased this guy down. They're all involved in the ultimate death and the ultimate killing. So that's why he's been charged with murder. Now the investigation has gone on to it's still actually with Tom Durden, who is the 3rd prosecutor. The Atlanta FBI spokesman, Kevin Rosen, said that they're going to be assisting as well. So the FBI is involved, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's involved. Everybody's involved because of the public outcry. Now, let's take a look at the statute. I want to actually really spend some time on what this statute says, because there's a couple different ways to interpret it. It goes down to the citizen's arrest statute. And by and large, I got a huge problem with these statutes because I don't think citizens are qualified to make any arrests. I think this case is a great example of it. I don't know if they were operating with knowledge of this statute or not, or what their thought process was. But here's what the statute says. So this comes from Georgia Code 17-4-60. They pulled this from 2008. It says, a private person may arrest an offender if the offense is committed in his presence or with his immediate knowledge. Within his presence or within immediate knowledge. Okay, these are two important terms of art. If the offense is a felony and the offender is escaping or attempting to escape, a private person may arrest him upon reasonable and probable grounds of suspicion. Okay, so how do you interpret this statute? This is something that a lot of people are saying is very, very clear. And it's funny because they say it's very clear and they both go in both directions. So you've got on the one hand, it's being interpreted to say, hey, this person committed a felony, and therefore we can make the arrest. We can stop him. We can detain him. All we need is reasonable and probable grounds of suspicion. And what they're going to be doing is looking towards his prior arrests, his prior convictions. They're going to be looking at other surveillance footage or any of those things. If you dive into this statute, okay, this is it. This is all we've got on this thing. Okay, it's not any longer. There are other statutes from other states that say you can only do it for non-dangerous, non-felonies. You can only do it, but you can't use any deadly force. You can't, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of guidance on how this statute works. There's really not in this case. It's pretty bare. So on the one hand, saying this is it. It's all we need. He can go and he can make a full-on arrest, and if he gets attacked, he's basically sort of a pseudo police officer. He can do whatever he wants, particularly if it's because it's a felony. On the other side, the idea is that no, actually, it's none of those things. What we're seeing from George and Travis, they had no indication, they had no knowledge of any crime being committed in their presence, and they had no knowledge that a crime was being committed within his immediate knowledge. Okay, it says immediate knowledge. It's got to be in his presence. There are reasons for this. These aren't just terms of art. They're important. These are what lawyers do, is we study these words and we break them down and we try to analyze what they mean and why they mean what they mean. Now, the first sentence of this statute, the offense is committed in his presence or within his immediate knowledge. The way I read it is that is the operating sentence. The operating language is right there. So it's very clear. It's got to be committed in his presence. So a crime would have needed to have been committed in the presence of Travis and Greg. Or they need to have immediate knowledge of an actual crime being committed. When you dive into case law, so what ends up happening, just so you understand how criminal law works, you have a broad statute like this that is not very well written, doesn't give us a lot of guidance. When these issues pop up and they get processed through the court system, you'll look at different cases and you'll see how the courts interpreted the statute, and you'll see how they're going to be reading it. Are they going to say this applies to whatever you want, future crimes, past crimes, or does it really need to be an immediate crime with immediate knowledge of the offense? And I've not done the research personally. There are other people that I've been following, other attorneys and other lawyers who are based in Georgia, who are saying that a lot of this statute, it actually just doesn't apply to any prior crimes. So for the claim that this officer had an arrest with Ahmaud years ago, and so this officer knows that this guy is inclined to commit other crimes. You can't do that in criminal law. That's called propensity evidence. You can't say that a person, because they committed a past crime, has a propensity to commit another crime. You just can't do that, because people could do that all the time. They could say, well, that guy's got 3 felonies, so the likelihood that he committed this felony must be higher because of the prior 3 felonies. That's not how our judicial system works. Every single case needs to be viewed in a little bit of a vacuum. We even sever charges from other cases. So we'll say, if this person was charged with a child pornography case and a DUI, we don't want the DUI jury to hear all about the child pornography charges. And so you separate those cases because you want the state, you want the government to prove the facts on the individual merits in an isolated situation. Either the person was committing a crime at this very time under these very circumstances, or they weren't. So you can't go back and look at someone's prior history and say, well, because he had a shoplifting charge and a gun charge, it must mean that he's a dangerous burglar. You can't do that. That's presuming too much. You or I wouldn't like that either, right? I used to be a big drinker, a big, alcoholic drinker all the time. I used to drink all the time. I had a big problem with it. My story's long, and I could go into that. You can check some of that out on our sobriety topics, but it's something where that was part of my past. Because I used to drink doesn't mean that I am committing crimes that involve alcohol. So if somebody were to investigate me, I would want them to look at me right now. Who am I as a person today? What have I done today? Not what did I do 5 years ago? That's how our criminal justice system works. So for anybody who's out there saying, well, we got past videos, or he's doing this, or he's doing that, on this day, on February 23rd, 2020, did Travis and Greg, did Roddy, did anybody see him committing a crime on that day that justified a citizen's arrest? Let's see. So we go back to the statute, committed in his presence within immediate knowledge. why do these statutes even exist? What's the point of them? Why do we do these things? We have law enforcement. We've got multiple different agencies. In Arizona, we've got DPS, we've got Scottsdale Police, Phoenix Police, Mesa Police. We've got police everywhere. We've got, the FBI. We've got national law. We've got law enforcement for days. We don't need any more law enforcement. So why are we asking citizens or authorizing citizens to go and do these things? Well, there are a couple different reasons, and it really comes down to public policy. So why do we allow citizens to make arrests? Well, number one, if they have immediate knowledge and this happened within their presence, we're going to give them some authority to act. And the reason being is because these things are happening in real time. We allow citizens to make arrests when it is with immediate knowledge or within your presence because it's happening in real time. It's happening right before your eyes. There is no time for the police to arrive. There just isn't. So we're giving citizens some authority to say, hey, if you see something happening right now, you don't necessarily need to step out, call 911. If there's something you can do to stop that from happening immediately, go ahead and do it. You're seeing it right in front of your very eyes. You have exact immediate knowledge of this thing happening, so you can take some action. The other public policy reason is because it protects people who are doing good deeds. It protects good Samaritans. So if you take a risk and something good comes out of it, the law is going to have your back. We go back to the bank robbery example, okay? If you are in that same situation, let's say there's a bank robbery happening, there's somebody in the bank, they're going up to the teller and they have a gun in their face and they're threatening to shoot and kill them. If a passerby or a bystander or somebody else in the bank who is not involved in the situation runs up and tackles the gunman and stops that robbery from happening, what we want to do as a society is protect from that type of lawlessness, to protect people. There's life at stake there. There's a robbery, there's criminality that's taking place. And the person who saw it happening right in front of them. They don't need to be a veteran of law enforcement. They don't need to, study statutes. They don't need to know criminal procedure, the rules of evidence. They know that a bank robbery is taking place. They can act on it. There's some definiteness there. There is, it's very clear cut, there's no questions about it. The reason we allow them to act that way and not have any repercussions is because if they did, then people wouldn't act that way, right? So we want to protect them. We want to prevent them from having liability for that. So now let's say, in a situation, somebody thinks that somebody was doing something wrong, and so they want to make a citizen's arrest. Well, if they're wrong about that citizen's arrest, then there may be liability for that person. So that's when the false imprisonment claims come up. That's when, potential kidnapping charges and things like that can come up, which is why this stuff doesn't happen often. Most people never operate under these rules. They call the police, which is really the right thing to do. So then the question that we want to analyze is, should these guys have made a citizen's arrest? Did they make a citizen's arrest? Was this something that is going to protect them? Are they going to have some immunity protections from this based on what they did? And when we're analyzing the statute, we want to talk about it in terms of public policy. Think about it in terms of public policy. So we have a specific segment from the police report, and I want to show you that and run through it with you quickly here. The video that we see doesn't show us a whole lot. It's about 20-25 seconds long. We see some cars running up, and we see Ahmaud kind of get out of or make a sharp turn and go after Travis. And Travis is there standing, pointing a shotgun with him. We've got another person in the back of the truck who is fumbling around with another gun. And it's sort of a chaotic scene. Ahmaud gets shot 3 times, and then he just stumbles to the ground, and he's dead because he got shot by a shotgun 3 times. Everybody is spinning the story in the way that they want to spin it. Okay, you can really review that video, I think, in only one way. I think that he was clearly not the aggressor at all. It looked like these 3 guys were chasing him and running around, and he was responding, and they killed him. And that's the end of the analysis of the video. But now let's look at the actual police report. So this police report is written. By and large, my general rule is, read police reports with a grain of salt, with a skeptical eye, because they're just, one person's version, one person's interpretation of the event, and they're wrong a lot of the time, quite frankly. But here's what they say. So let's take a look at it. And again, think about the citizen's arrest statute. Was there any observation of a crime happening? Did they see anything? Let's take a look at the report. So what we see here is that we've got several break-ins, all caught on surveillance video. None of them identify the person that we've talked about. Michael stated that he was in his front yard and he saw the suspect from the break-ins hauling ass down Satya toward Buford Drive. McMichael stated that he ran inside his house and he shouts over to Travis. He says, Travis, the guy is running down the street. Let's go. So they've been kind of waiting for this guy to happen. McMichael stated he went to his bedroom, grabbed his .357. They didn't know if the male was armed or not. McMichael stated the other night they saw the same male, presumably, and his pants were down, hand was in his pants, leading him to believe that the male was armed. All right, so on this first paragraph, McMichael stated that he was in his front yard and saw the suspect hauling ass. So again, no evidence of a crime there. You're allowed to be in your front yard. You're allowed to be walking around. The guy, Ahmaud's allowed to be jogging, allowed to be outside. He didn't have, any property on him. He wasn't seen leaving the house, according to this police report. So the police, they interview everybody, then they write what's supposed to be their objective interpretation of the events. Nothing in that first paragraph says to me that they saw a crime happening in their immediate presence and they had no immediate knowledge of it. They weren't there. He was in his front yard, and Ahmaud was also outside. Greg goes inside, tells his son, who also obviously couldn't see anything because he was inside, and says, that's the guy. Let's go. Get your guns. Let's go. Let's go get him. No evidence. They didn't see anything of a crime. They may have seen it in the past, but that's not the point of the statute. The point of the statute is to arrest somebody who is in the middle of a crime, immediate presence within your knowledge. You have to be seeing it happen in real time. None of that happened here. So they grab the gun. Travis gets back. They get in the truck. They drive down Satya. They go toward Buford. McMichael stated they arrived on the intersection of Satya Drive and Holmes Drive. They saw the unidentified male go to Buford Drive. He drove down Buford. They tried to cut off the male. He then stated the unidentified turned, began running back towards the direction where they came, and then Roddy jumped out to try to block him. He was unsuccessful, stated he jumped back into the bed of the truck, and they continued to go. We have a whole paragraph of them literally chasing this guy. Like 4 different streets, 4 different turns, going down, coming back. We've got all of these guys in different cars chasing this guy down. And there's again, nothing in that paragraph shows me that they witnessed or saw any evidence of law breaking at all. We go to the last paragraph, doesn't add a whole lot more. They went up to the unidentified male and they shouted, stop, stop, stop. We want to talk to you. Travis stated they pulled up beside the male, which they really didn't. If you watch the video, that actually didn't happen. They didn't just pull up beside him. I mean, he's kind of running the opposite direction. Then he makes a cut in front of the car. Then he goes over to Travis. So it's just not accurate. I think McMichael is being dishonest or misremembering. And he says that he exited the truck with a shotgun. The unidentified male began to violently attack Travis and started fighting over the shotgun, which, again, I just didn't see that. I saw a guy who was scared because there were 3 guys with guns chasing him around a number of different streets, a number of different areas, and I just don't see that at all. I think that's completely a misinterpretation of what happened here. So my question now, there's a additional analysis that, of course, we can do on this. Was it first degree murder? Was it second degree murder? Was it intentional? Was it false imprisonment? Was it kidnapping? Were they justified in using force? You could analyze this for days, but I just don't think it even crosses the initial threshold. Was the citizen's arrest valid? I think you have to go back to the statute and you have to look at those 2 things. The statute is for people to stop an immediate crime. You have to see it and stop it. It needs to be happening right in front of you. Otherwise, the public policy should be to call law enforcement, right? You should bring other people in who actually have legal authority to make these arrests and do these things. The McMichaels didn't. So they were the ones who caused this whole altercation to start, and their actions, of course, resulted in Ahmaud's death, which is tragic, needless and tragic, without any question. So what I want to leave with, when we're thinking through these things, the big question, anytime we're talking about law or setting law, we want to talk about the incentives that we're creating. Law is meant to help create a fluid, functioning society where things operate smoothly. And when we make changes to the law, just like we make changes to anything, tax policy, or whether or not you put salt on your food, all of our decisions have consequences. And when we're going through this case, when we're going through this analysis, these two guys were indicted. Ahmaud is dead. The case is going to be presumably going on for probably a couple years now. These guys have galvanized a whole lot of support from different sort of niche segments of our society, and they're going to get support. They're going to get funding. They're going to get a lot of uprising from people who are going to want to see them come out of this thing victoriously because they think they did the right thing. I couldn't disagree more. I think what they did was horrendous. But I want to talk about the incentives that this creates. So just think about these questions. Do we want more incidents like this or less? Okay. Do we want more citizen arrests or less? Do we want this more of this version of a road law where people can just, grab their guns and go out and chase anybody who they think is a suspect? Is that the society that you want to live in, where people are just running around? This could have been you. This could have been your son. This could have been your friend, somebody who is out just, doing things, regardless of whether or not there was prior misconduct. On a day like that day on February 23rd, do you want people to just grab guns and come chase people down? I don't. Do you want the prosecutors' offices to sort of cover things up? Do you want them to make sure that they're not releasing videos? Do you want one prosecutor to tell the police to not make arrests and then tell the public that they did make arrests? Do you want one prosecutor to kind of fail to recuse himself because his son works over at the district attorney's office? Do you want prosecutors making charging decisions, or do you want them to go to grand juries? We had 3 prosecutors, 3 of them, who reviewed this case and who said, we are not going to file charges. We don't think there's enough there. Okay. We had Jackie, we had Barnhill, and then we had the last guy, Tom. And they all reviewed it. They all had the video, and they all said, no, not enough there. Now, you can decide whether or not that's true or not, whether or not there may be some ulterior motives as to why they chose not to actually make these arrests or investigate it to the extent that it should have been investigated. What's very interesting to me is that as soon as the public came out and saw the video, Tom, the 3rd prosecutor, immediately said, "Uh-oh, I better get this thing over to a grand jury immediately." And he did. He turned it right over to a grand jury. Now, he didn't want to make the decision. He didn't want to say, yeah, I reviewed the facts of this case. There's enough probable cause. We're going to go ahead and charge this thing. He said, you know what? We're going to send that over to a grand jury. I'm going to let them decide. So he passed the ball. It was time to shoot it and hit a 3-pointer, and he just passed the ball. The clock was out. He passed the ball over to the grand jury. The grand jury then took it and indicted them. Immediately, we had an arrest within 2 days after the video going public, because it's clear to a grand jury, we don't want this type of road law. We do not want this type of prosecutorial cover-up. We don't want bored police officer retirees patrolling around and acting as law enforcement of the neighborhood. We don't want that. I certainly do not want that. This has been the biggest whitewashing that I have seen in the news in a long time. I mean, this one is just very obvious to me that there was a lot of misconduct, a lot of hesitancy to charge this guy because of his, I'm presuming, because of his involvement with this agency for so long. And then the final point that I want to leave people with is, do we want to protect property, or do we want to protect life? Okay, this is a big distinction here, and a lot of people are sort of missing the mark on this. In law, you can't value property over life in most situations, with a couple caveats. Okay, so when we're going through tort law in law school, we talk about a case where a guy had a piece of property and he didn't want people coming and sleeping in his property, sleeping in the home. And nobody was living at this property. It was sort of a rental property, and nobody was there. And so the question in this hypothetical that came up was, well, what if this guy booby-trapped his doors and his windows so that people would stop breaking in? If they kick the door in, he's going to set up a shotgun, and the shotgun's just going to blast out into the door. So anybody who's coming through the door is going to get hit with a shotgun round to the chest. Is that okay? And this was a discussion that we had with the entire class and our professor, and she was basically, dividing the class, and half the class said, yeah, it's his property. He has a total right to protect that property. People shouldn't be breaking in. If they break in, they're going to get caught with something like a shotgun or an electrical fence that electrocutes them or kills them or whatever it is. And then the other half of the class, absolutely not, right? And that's the point. The point is life is more important than property. We value human beings more than we value a stolen TV or a stolen necklace or a stolen purse. And so our public policy is meant to cater to that. It's meant to fulfill that sort of promise that we make as a society. So, you can't just shoot somebody for stealing your purse. Now, if they're stealing your purse and they're also threatening your life, or they're breaking into your home and you don't know what they're doing because your family's there, your kids are there, maybe they're there to rape and murder you. Yeah, at that point in time, you can shoot and kill that person because you're protecting life. When it comes to life versus life, your life and protecting your life is your right to do that. But when it comes to just property and life, there's no question there that life is more important than property. And the people who are sort of being calloused about this whole thing and thinking, my gosh, well, they had a right. They were just enforcing the law. This guy was stealing and robbing things. Guys, seriously, this could have been anybody in your family. This could have been somebody that you're close to. This could have been you, for crying out loud. This could have been you walking down the street being accused of a crime, and you have some psychopaths who think that they're above the law. They've been operating as part of the law for a long period of time, and they think that they can just go and stop you. And in my mind, it's disgusting behavior. It's not a world that I want to live in. And, this is a weird story for me. I'm a defense lawyer. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. My job and my firm's job, and everybody here, we've got a whole team of people here that work towards this goal on a daily basis. It's to defend people against charges. And in this situation, I get to play a little bit more of a prosecutor, because what I'm seeing here is the government is not playing fair. They were not playing fair in this case. They hid this video. They hid this evidence. Had that one defense attorney, who's a hero in my mind, had they not released that video, this whole thing would have been swept under the rug. And I don't think anybody can deny that. I don't care what camp you're in. If you're in the badpopo camp or in the traditional left or the traditional right, everything that we're seeing here would have been swept under the rug but for this video. So thankfully it's out. We're going to continue to follow this case. I think this is going to be a very interesting one. I don't think that there's any basis in fact that these guys are not convicted of some sort of criminal element, in large part because it's really bad what they did. It's horrendous what they did. They killed somebody who didn't need to be killed. Totally a tragedy across the board. And we're going to follow it. We're going to see what ends up happening. So that's all I have in terms of my presentation. Let me just run through a couple questions here. So we had some people in the chat, and not sure if a lot of people agree with me or not, but let's take a look. Yeah, there's a lot here. Okay. Yeah, a lot of questions. So they were a couple minutes behind. All this is on video. Police report is wrong in that area. Let's see. This has caused a huge problem. Cops were on the scene 90 seconds after Ahmaud hit the ground. Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, less than 90 seconds, somebody else says. Kenny Bohannon says less than 90 seconds. Hard to say when the cops got there, as I don't think first one had sirens on. Yep. Why do you think the ball was passed around like this? Because of ties these men have to the legal community. Yeah, it's a great question. It's not something that I've necessarily understood a whole lot. I've talked to a lot of people about these topics, and what I've experienced is there's a culture. There's sort of an us versus them culture that has been built up in a lot of these communities. A lot of the police departments, a lot of the prosecutors' offices, even a lot of judges, they're all sort of on the inside. And so if somebody on the inside actually, is in trouble, they all circle their wagons up and they just protect them. And you can look this up on Wikipedia if you want. It's called the blue shield, or the blue line. Basically, law enforcement. There's a whole Wikipedia article about this phenomenon, about police and prosecutors protecting police and prosecutors. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen cops, get away with stuff that you or I would absolutely not get away with. So the question is, well, if that were me, if I decided to do something as asinine as chase somebody down with a shotgun and kill them, would I, have this type of review that these prosecutors did on the case? Absolutely not. And neither would any of our clients. So this guy, in my opinion, just got very special treatment. I think that a lot of this is political, as we're seeing a lot of these people are running for particular offices. Jackie Johnson's running for office. These other 2 county attorneys or district attorneys or circuit district attorneys or whatever they call them there, they're running for office at some point. And so passing the ball is the political expedient thing to do. Not going to say passing the ball is not making a decision. They can just go ahead and pass it. They can say, well, the grand jury indicted him. The grand jury reviewed the facts and they made the indictment. We sat on it for 74 days or 75 days or whatever it was. But now we're going to pass it off to them and allow them to make the decision. It's like not making a difficult decision. Have your boss do it. And that's kind of what they did. So when it comes election time, I don't know if that guy's running for election this year or 4 years or 6 years from now. He doesn't have to have the taint of that decision on his record. So that's my thought process on it. I'm sure he'll have his own justifications. We've seen some pretty bizarre justifications here. On the video, the cop car at 13:15:36 passes Travis Michael's house and arrives on scene moments later. 100 yards by road. Okay, so this neo-Epicurean person on our channel has a ton of information on this case. Facts are all out there. No one is looking at the facts. People don't know he was shot outside Travis's home. People don't know the video shows Greg on the phone to 911. There's also double audio recording for the whole event. Greg didn't hang up. Apparently he's been contacted by the media and all sorts of things. So, so I'd actually love that report. If Neo-Epicurean, you're on there and you want to send me some information, I'd love to take a look at it. I'll throw my email in the chat. It's also robert@rrlawaz.com. So robert@rrlawaz.com. And I just threw it in the chat, and, a lot of comments. I appreciate the interaction. I appreciate the questions. And, this is something that we'll continue to follow. Like I said, there is a lot more information, I think, that's probably going to come to light. We're going to see what these prosecutors do with it, see if sort of the handoff between local circuit districts, city police and prosecutors. It sounds like it's being handed up over into the statewide law enforcement agency, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And we'll see what they do about that. So that's it for me, everybody. I want to thank you for tuning in today. If you have not already done so, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button on our channel, because we're going to keep covering stories like this. I'd love to have you back here 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. It's 4 p.m. Arizona time, so translate that to your home state. Watching the Watchers is also on Facebook, so if you prefer to watch there, we have a Facebook group. Just search for Watching the Watchers and you'll see it all there. Otherwise, we'll be back next week. Have a great rest of your week, a great evening, and thanks for tuning in.